Hello fellow Squatchers, my name is Scott Taylor. I'm a BFRO Field Investigator in Washington State. I've been doing research since 2006. I had my first encounter in 2005, and I've done nearly 170 investigations. Most of those investigations are the typical I saw a Sasquatch cross the road type of investigation. But what I've really learned is that you learn the most from the habituation type of situation. When a person or a family is living out in a remote area in a home or someplace, they're having interactions on a regular basis. I've also learned through doing the investigations and learned from these witnesses and from other investigators and through going to expeditions and that kind of thing, that part that we call the paranormal is actually really happening. I've had it happen to myself. I've heard the mind speak, I've seen the mental slideshows, seen the orbs, portals, all those kind of things. Those aren't normally talked about amongst a lot of BFRO people. However, a lot of us have experienced it and know what happens. A friend of mine named Dr. Matthew Johnson, who's a colleague, he uses the habituation method, and pretty much most Sasquatchers are familiar with his work, know about SOA down in Oregon and Soya later. A great many have probably heard him speak or maybe read his book, My 50-Year Journey Come Full Circle, which I have a little part in. But in his book he talks about what they call the Exodus, and one of the main characters is a Sasquatch that is actually the leader of the Council of 12. So a few months ago, one of my other friends, John Callender, had to leave the state and move to back east, and he turned over an investigation to me that he hadn't been able to follow up on, and this is down by Centralia. And so I called the gentleman, and my wife and I went out and talked to he and his wife and asked them what's going on, and a lot of strange things were going on. We walked his property, we found stick structures, we found footprints, asked him what had happened. He had seen one evening behind his place, saw the orange glowing eyes. I went there, stood at where it stood, raised my hand as high as I could, and he says that's about where its eyes were, which would make it, 8 feet or so, typical. He even has turkeys, and if those turkeys are so foolish as to try to nest for the night within arm's reach of the fence, they disappear. So most of his turkeys have learned to stay in the middle of the pen and you won't be bothered. So he's had paranormal type things going on, thought his house was haunted, but all of it to me said Sasquatch. He's also hearing the mind speak, and he thought he was actually going crazy, and it turned out that he's not. They're actually talking to him, and the things that are telling him, that they are telling him when he asked me about it, all makes perfect sense. So, for instance, they ask, or they told him actually, humans cannot go through the portals and come back. And true, that's the way it is. So, portals are a big part of Dr. Johnson's research and the story of the Exodus. So I wasn't for sure if this witness was really on the up and up with me, and so I asked Dr. Johnson about it, and he said, just ask him who the leader of the Council of 12 is. Well, I know who that is. Anybody who's read Dr. J's books knows who that is. Anybody who follows Team Squatch in USA knows who that is. But the interesting thing about this witness is he doesn't have internet, he doesn't have a Facebook presence, his cell phone coverage is so poor he can barely get a text out. So he's somewhat isolated from all the normal information sources that most of the rest of us have. So he's a kind of an ideal subject here to test this. So I ask them, who's the leader of the Council of 12? And he had no idea what I was talking about. I said, just go ahead, ask him who the leader of the Council of 12 is. So he did, and the answer he got was a feeling of puzzlement, wondering, what is this question? What do you really mean? And so he told me that, and I said, keep asking, who's the leader of the Council of 12? So the answer he got back after a couple of weeks was Elohim. Those of you that know your Bible know that the Hebrew word for God that is used in chapter 1 of Genesis, the creation story, is Elohim. So God is the leader of the Council of 12. Well, that's pretty interesting because if they weren't legit, who would know that? So I said, that's an interesting answer, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. Ask them who the leader of the Council of 12 is. So he went back, he asked them that. And over the next 2 weeks, he kept hearing north. And so he thought, well, I'll go out north of my house, which is where the woods are, is where they are. And you know, they're asking me to come out there. And he'd go out there and nothing would happen. And so he'd wait there for a while, then he'd go back home. And they kept saying that. And evidently they weren't quite getting through, or he wasn't understanding them. So they used the mental slideshow technique, and they showed him a picture from one of his memories. It's a picture that I believe it was a cousin had shown him several years ago, and it was a picture of a boy, and that boy's name was Zorth. And when they showed him that picture in his mind, he got it. And he texted me and he says, Scott, the name of the leader of the Council of 12 is Zorth. So, this validates Dr. Johnson's account from Soya of the Exodus, and all of that is validated through this corroboration. So, these Sasquatches here are connected to those Sasquatches there, and know who the leader of the Council of 12 is.